can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Mark Rickmeier of TXI Digital. You can check him out. And Mark, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes of the podcast people should check out. Since this is part of the Top Agency series, let's see. I had Todd Taskey on. Todd Taskey helps pair agencies with private equity. He helps sell agencies, and he's got the Second Bite podcast because he finds an agency will sell, and then if private equity sells again, sometimes they make more in the second bite than the first. So it's a good conversation around the agency space, M&A space, valuation space. That was an interesting one. Kevin Hurrigan was another one of Spinutech. He's had an agency since 1995. Mark, so it was interesting to see the landscape of not just agency life or entrepreneurship, but also the internet. And so that was an interesting one and many more on InspiredInsider.com. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect their dream relationships and partnerships. We do that in two ways. One, we help companies launch and run your podcast. We're an easy button to do that. We do the strategy, accountability, and the full production execution. And second, we're an easy button for our companies gifting. So we make gifting and staying top of mind to your clients, partners, prospects, even gifts to staff from a culture perspective, easy and affordable. And all people do is give us a list of the people, and then we send a sequence of follow-ups to those people. Mark, we call ourselves kind of the magic elves that run in the background to make it all easy for our company to build the relationships in so they can run their business. For me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways on how I can give to my best relationships. And I have found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire on the podcast. And second, send people tasty treats in the mail ongoing. So check out rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. I'm excited to introduce Mark Rickmeier. He's the CEO of TXI. TXI stands for Technology, User Experience, and Innovation. They're a consulting firm that designs and delivers custom software. They're located and headquartered in Chicago. He's also the founder of Walkshop, which is a hiking plus leadership development 5-day retreat that takes leaders out in the woods to disconnect together, obviously connecting. But Mark, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to getting into this together.
Talk about TXI and what you do. I'm gonna share the website so people can see it.
Nice. So we describe TXI as a product innovation firm in that we are helping our clients figuring out two things. One, what is the right thing to build, setting up a strategy and helping them think through where is there opportunity and white space in the market for them to create a competitive advantage. And then after they think about what's the right thing to build, then you think about how do you build it right? So what is to have the agile and engineering and design discipline to be able to create digital products and bring them to market. So you have a high functioning strategy and research team on the build the right thing side, and then you have a really high functioning engineering, design, and delivery capability on the build the thing right side. And the unique thing about TXI is being able to do both of those things in kind of one organization.
I know you help a lot of different industries. Digital health, biopharma, industry 4.0, manufacturing, comms and media. What do people come to you with? Because like you say, that makes sense. It's like you basically help them solve problems. And maybe sometimes they don't even know what the problems are because there's a white space there. What are people coming to you asking to start?
It's funny. So sometimes these days we get one of a couple of different questions. One is, I have data everywhere and I don't know what to do with it. I'm not quite sure how to leverage data to be able to drive my business forward. I know a lot about some of the systems I want to build, but we're seeing a lot of, especially with legacy systems, a lot of what I call swivel chair integration, where someone's like, all right, I type something into this system, and I swivel over to this other system, I do something in this other system, and like a human's trying to connect all the dots. And so there's no real cohesive understanding of of their business operations. Another common question I get is, my board is telling me to do something with AI. Question mark? Like, what's the thing I should be doing? How do I leverage this new technology? I don't really understand what's changing in that space. And then occasionally we'll get someone who comes in with a solution in mind. And this is probably the hardest one for us, because we have to actually back them up a bit. So we'll get someone coming in saying, hey, we want to build a mobile application. And we have to say, great that you have that ambition, but step back. What's the problem you're trying to solve? We are far more interested in that, because there's lots of different ways you could go about delivering software. And maybe the mobile application is the right path, but oftentimes there's maybe going to be a different way or an alternative way to solve that problem. And if we don't know what the root of the problem is, we really can't help you. So like, one of the things we really try to avoid, if you ever hear the word just on a phone call, it is not a TXI engagement. So if someone's like, I already have 5 developers, I just need 2 more. Great, go call a staff aug firm. There's lots of them about. That's not who we are. Or someone says, I don't need a designer, just make it look pretty. Or I don't need to talk to end users, I just want to make it do this. I just want a mobile app. We really need to understand the root cause, the problem we're trying to solve. And from a design thinking perspective, really try to understand and quantify the problem before we get too excited about a potential solution. So I would say that the third kind of thing that people come to us with is where they have that solution in mind, and we got to like back it up a minute and get more concrete about the users we're trying to serve and the problems that they're facing, that we can make sure we solve the project the right way. One of my favorite stories was a university who said they wanted a mobile app. And we said, we can do that. It'll cost you $500,000 and it'll take a few months to go live. Or maybe this thing that looks a lot more like a chatbot, which can go live in 6 weeks, is actually the better option. We can deliver you a mobile app.
So Mark, you were saying, they came to you, we have this great solution, right? We want a mobile app. And you're like, well, I like how you frame it. It's like, we can charge you $1 million. No, it wasn't $1 million, but whatever. And it will take a year, or we can use this chatbot thing that accomplishes the same goal for a fraction of the price, and we can launch it in 6 weeks.
I think that was the beginning of when clients started understanding the difference between like a custom dev shop and a product innovation company. Because we could build them a mobile app and it would go live on time, and it would probably cost $500,000, and I don't think anyone was going to use it. Or we said we could deliver a totally different solution that more accurately met the needs of their users, and we could do that in about 6 weeks. The goal, again, is to help them build the right thing and then build the thing right, so you have a strong technical foundation. But you have to move beyond the agile ability to execute projects well. Like, it's an awfully big waste. And then this is something how I used to think about things, where they would come to us and we'd build them an MVP or a minimum viable product. We go live in a few short months. And if you're finding out at that point that it's not going to have high adoption, what a waste of months and time and resources. So a big part of that discovery process is trying to figure out what the right real solution to the problem could be. And oftentimes it's different than what the client initially asks. So that's just part of being a good partner or being a good consultant, especially if you're in that brand of being in product innovation as opposed to custom software. If they came in saying, I want a mobile app, the answer is not, let's go build you a mobile app. The answer is, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And trying to dig into that as much as you can, because there may be other ways of delivering higher value. And in this case, save them a bunch of money in the process.
Yeah, so the MVP they originally come to you with may be a totally different MVP.
Yeah, exactly right.
Talk about the discovery process a little bit, because, you really, I have experienced this, client, maybe they have spent a long time thinking about this. And so even though you are like, here's maybe, let's get to the root of the problem, you're putting it in a nice way so they listen to you. But I know that clients are sometimes set in their ways, or they could be.
I think the main thing you really have to advocate for is getting time with the end users that'll be impacted by the project. Like in this one case, it was a school and the administration was trying to improve the lives of their students, but the administration was coming up with the requirements. In this case, it was great, let's go talk to some students first before we start getting too excited about what the administration thinks that they want. And so there's an opportunity to educate. You don't have to spend years or months doing this, but like having time to do user research and spend time doing rapid prototyping and validating some of your assumptions early allows you to start getting a more informed decision around where the product should go. This is the great value that design thinking teaches us. It kind of takes the benefit. Agile did a lot of work in the 90s and the 2000s of professionalizing that the further, how do you build the thing right? How do you have a really solid execution engine? But Agile is not a great answer for how do you build the right thing. And so that's where you have to move beyond your ability to execute solid MVPs. You got to think about how do I understand earlier the needs of my users and better triangulate what the real opportunity is. That's where design thinking starts changing how you operate and having a more rigorous discovery process to get inside the heads of your users and really starting to uncover their true needs.
Yeah, talk about the discovery process a little bit because it's really an important foundation. And it sounds like obviously starting with what's the problem, and then it sounds like you want to actually talk to users or potential users and validate assumptions. What else is a part of the discovery process when a company comes to you that's so important?
So there's a whole rigor around how you do user research, that you're not informing the users or kind of guiding the users. You really want to be able to get direct insights from them and then use those insights to start informing how you might solve a problem. So the reason I actually have, if you've ever seen the double diamond, it's a metaphor for how you go about trying to involve design thinking in this early stage in discovery. And so if you think about the first half of the diamond is you're expanding out from a point and you're going wide and saying, let's go talk to various different users and find out like what we think the needs, the problems are, and then we narrow down towards the end of defining what's the key problem we want to solve. And then again, the second diamond, you go wide again and say, how might we solve this problem in a bunch of different ways? What are the different ways we might do that? And then you can prototype and test those and come back and say, we think of the ones we tested, this is the best option to solve that. And so it's a way to rapidly explore the needs of users, to be able to map those out, to be able to use those with a decider to get down to the top pains you want to resolve, and then having those in your mind so when you are coming up with concepts and you are prototyping, you're basing them on real problems and real needs. You have a persona in mind. I love that, that's where we get excited about prototyping, because it's not just a designer that can do that. This is where it's helpful to have developers, engineers, product people in the room saying, how might we solve this problem? And there's lots of different ways you can do that. And then you have the ability to rapidly prototype those and put them in the hands of users. You're not testing working software, but you're testing concepts. You're testing whether this is going to be feasible and viable and desirable. And then we can come back and say, we really think the best way to do this is this path. So I think that little bit of time and energy spent in discovery can shave off hundreds of thousands of dollars in the actual execution of the work by not building unnecessary features or not going down the wrong path to begin with. And it allows you to validate. And if you're going to fail, you'd rather fail on paper with a bad prototype than going and build a thing in MVP, ship it to market, and realize you missed the mark. So I think there's a lot of how software was written in the 2000s has had to change to incorporate more design thinking strategies and opportunities in the early stage of discovery to make sure that when you actually are building something, you're building the right thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I love this discussion around, because it's really a way of thinking. It could be applied to any company in general. And there was an example I'd love for you to talk about, the railcar company, because this is a great example. I just want to point out, I thought you just said the title of your next book, but I looked up and Double Diamond is actually, someone does have that book. You could rename it, but
the Double Diamond is, it's a framework that's been out for a while. I won't go into that. Yeah,
but your subheadline will be good, whatever you would say. So,
finding diamonds in the rough. Yeah. There's definitely, so the railcar company was interesting because this is a business that's been around for over 100 years, publicly traded company. They lease rail cars out and they maintain their own cars, figuring if they can extend the life of that rail car by 20 or 30 years by taking good care of it, that makes it a much more valuable asset on the lease side. And it really only makes money when that car is actually out on the rails carrying goods. So they try to make sure they can minimize that service event where the car is getting fixed, because every minute it's in the rail yard getting fixed is a minute it's not earning revenue. And so our thought was, well, if you can walk around the rail yard with a designer, an engineer, and a data scientist, and an AI strategist, and say, how might we think about improving the way rail cars are maintained? If you can shave that down from 64 days down to 54 days, it's millions of dollars of savings a year. I think what's interesting is that the average time to repair a rail car in the US is around like 110 days, something like that. So this company is already industry leader by a wide order of magnitude at 60 some odd days. But the opportunity to get them even further would have huge ramifications, not just on the cost savings, but that improved operational efficiency would allow them to start, for example, maintaining other people's rail cars with the extra capacity they had. And then they get insights into fleets that they might want to acquire. So you start thinking about all kinds of other commercial benefits. So in this case, the discovery was, is it possible? What can we learn by walking around the rail yard? And again, not doing that from the home office, not doing that by talking to the operators and the executives. He said, let's go to the actual rail yard. Let's go walk around with the steel-toed boots and the hard hats, talking to operators, talking to inspectors, cleaners, and the repair yard to get a sense of what could we be doing to change the way we do this with the lens of a designer and a data scientist and an AI engineer, just because they see the world differently. That's what I think we're at our best, is when we take people who have deep industry and domain knowledge, like about how to run a rail yard, and really good digital strategists and data scientists and engineers to think about how can we think about this problem differently, and then match two together to think about what are some opportunities, what's a white space here, what's a new way of operating we might be able to think through.
What were some insights you gleaned from walking around?
So we saw, I'd say there were some things that were just good digital transformation things we could do, manual processes that were out of an 8-hour day. For an inspector who's looking at multiple rail cars and looking for damage and dents and corrosion and things like that, about 2 hours a day was spent, maybe 90 minutes was spent actually along a rail car side by side. The rest of the time is back in an office, typing up all their notes, adding in details, uploading photos. It was a lot of manual time. And a lot of that can be done differently now with mobile technology and thinking about what you can do at the car side, as opposed to having to write it all on paper, go back and type it in. There was also a fair amount of what we call that swivel chair integration, where you have different things in different systems and they have to manually make sure they're all up to date. So there's like just some low-hanging fruit ways we can optimize the process. The more interesting things start going from how can we leverage data better? And so how can we start getting data about the operations of the yard? And there you're not thinking about what kind of a system am I replacing, but what kind of new data can I create that allows me to start using AI to optimize things. And so, for example, they have switching is a very expensive process in a rail yard. Switching is where you take a rail car from one train track and line and move it to another. It's very time consuming, very labor intensive, and it's expensive. And so if you can reduce switching costs, you can have a huge impact on the efficiency of a rail yard. And right now, when they think about what are the fewest amount of switches you need to move the right cars into the right shops at the right time, and they have a human who's probably one of the best at this in the industry, but it is a human in front of a whiteboard with a bunch of tiles looking at it and basically playing Tetris. So where do I move cars around to get the optimum work done today? That is the kind of thing that AI can do really well. We think about how can AI make recommendations on the best way to optimize my resources. Another way to use AI we were looking at is from like an NVIDIA perspective, where you have computer vision. How can I point cameras at a rail car and learn about what's wrong by having it automatically doing things like detecting dents, corrosion, damage, and start then using AI to be able to build up a work order on that. Things that used to take a human eye a lot of effort. And then there's a lot of manual work to build up the work order based on the damage you saw. And everything's kind of queued up waiting for the job to finish. So we started thinking about what are things we can start doing possibly in parallel. How can we speed up the necessary work for the inspector? And we are years, arguably decades away from this being autonomous. No one is thinking about, I want AI to do this all, especially in an industry where there's so much safety concern and all kinds of security protocols. So when you do work on a rail car, you have to make sure you're doing the right work at the right time. The maintenance is very heavily scrutinized. But rather than saying we're going to replace that human, we're just going to make their jobs a lot easier and more efficient. So they have maybe more approvals to do than just raw typing. How can we speed up their effort? And so I think sometimes when people hear AI, they're like, oh, AI is going to replace our jobs. AI is going to replace all the humans. No, like in this case, we want to make their jobs a lot easier, that they can spend more of their quality time inspecting rail cars and less time like typing up their findings in a document afterward.
Yeah, I mean, not only easier, but more fun, I'm sure. I mean, I don't know anyone's like, I want more paperwork in my day,
Yeah.
I mean, even I think of doctors. I mean, that's a big thing with doctors. Like I have friends who are surgeons and they're like, I think I spend, 80% of my day writing up notes, and things like that, So I'm wondering if you have different phases that you think about, because you mentioned it with the rail car, which is like, I don't know, the low hanging fruit phase. And then the next is like really optimizing even beyond what they can do or what they thought they could do.
Yeah, there is a spectrum. So we look at this almost like there's like we call it like a data pyramid, but there's a kind of a spectrum of how intelligent you want or need your products to be. And at a base layer, the most important concept is like how do you have well-structured data? Without that, you really can't be able to drive more intelligent products. So we were just at a Gartner conference talking about where is our industry going, and they had an interesting way of looking at this. These last 20 years, we've been in this super cycle around digital transformation. Take manual processes and digitize them. So you have a process or an application or a mobile app or web app that takes something that used to be done manually and do it digitally. Automate as many things as you can. And that was a huge boost in the economy and a huge boost in efficiency for operations. That is coming to an end where the next super cycle is going to be not about building digital products, but by building intelligent products. Products that can start using AI to make recommendations and start doing things more autonomously, which you cannot do unless you have a good, solid foundational data set to start training your models on. And so the very first thing we talk about when we're talking about this idea of building intelligent products is the foundational layer of can you get your data in order first? Interestingly, this foundational thing, it's not generally a tool set problem. It's a mindset problem. In a lot of organizations, there are strong cultural silos where it's like, this is my data, this is my application. I don't want to open that up or expose that to other places in the organization. And you need top-down leadership to say that the value is actually having transparent access to all of this information and having systems that integrate into a shared data repository, not thinking about applications and work processes as siloed individual things. That is as much of a mental political challenge as it is, I think, a technology one. But when you get that, when you have a shared kind of foundational data set to start thinking about, in this case, replacing a whiteboard with the actual structure, like where are the cars in my yard, building what we call a digital twin of that yard. Digital twins are a way to take an existing physical like plant operation or like work order and like make that something you now have data to build around. So now we have a digital twin of the yard. Now we can start getting up to that next level. And so here we can start getting into like the information layer. So how can I start providing unique notifications and alerts that allow a human to take action? So like, hey, inventory is low. If you were to shop this car for repairs, we would not be able to take order on it because we do not have the right materials in-house. Then beyond those kinds of things, now we have data coming from multiple different sources, all being normalized and made actionable in the first layer. Now we start providing information. The next is knowledge. And at the knowledge layer, you start getting to a place of not just what happened, but why it happened. This is helpful to say, like, inventory is low because we are missing a certain level of parts. I'm going to order those parts in. I'm able to start triggering an action. It's not just knowing about what's going on, but why it's happening, that I can take more of an actionable step towards doing something. And then the last is where we get to wisdom, where we start saying, I now have more insight than I used to. I can start taking not only like some autonomous actions happening, automatically start replenishing my supplies and inventory when they're low. Don't wait for a notification to go off. But also wisdom thinking about maybe where do I want to shop these cars? Maybe I need to rotate my entire yard around, or where I'm deploying the fleet to not even go to certain places because I know the inventory is going to be low there. It's being able to have wisdom about changing the way you operate based on the intelligence that you've gathered. And so as you get further and further up the pyramid, you can have, frankly, larger and larger operational savings, but you don't have to build something that's totally autonomous, that's really complex. Like, you can start getting benefit right at the foundational layer of just capturing data around things you don't already have. And I think that's where we're seeing, it's very exciting to talk about the promise of AI and the benefit it can have, but the unsexy truth is you really can't do any of that until you actually get your data house in order first to understand how that is really the foundation of these things. And this is the shift our industry needs to make. I think going from we are a computer science industry and to be like, well, actually, we're more of a data science industry as well. And have to understand that the data that we create is maybe more valuable than the system that creates them. It's moving from the concept of a digital software, digital technology, or digital transformation into these intelligent products, which I think differentiate from data products or from software digital products. Then you have to think about the data that you're creating, the access to data that you can use to start training a model as well.
I know your company, Marcus, solves a lot of interesting problems, and I'd love to hear a weird use case. Maybe one you didn't expect, because I know you've helped with the retail, digital health, biopharma, nonprofit education. What's been a weird use case? And while you think about that for a second, I could totally get what you're saying with the kind of the intelligence thing, because we had an issue with our HVAC, right? Like just our heating and cooling thing. And, they came out and they realized, okay, it's, they didn't have the part, right? But they didn't tell us that for like 2 weeks. They had to order it. It's like, well, you kind of knew what the issue, so if that talked to it, they probably would have known, okay, we're low on this part. That's probably a common part, and we should ordered it and had it. So I experienced that as from a consumer perspective, and it was painful from that perspective. But what's been a weird use case that of a problem that you solved?
There are two. I think one is weird, and one is maybe the most inspirational thing I think I've ever seen a client do. On the weird one, which I really enjoyed, our neighbor down the block is Tyson Foods, and they contacted us and said, we want to operate and think more like a software company with the agility that goes with that. Can you help us to institute design thinking and help us to, like, it's a mindset before it gets to be a tool set or a skill set? And we said, yeah, great. We don't make food though, right? And they're like, yeah. So rather than prototyping digital products and mobile apps, we were prototyping with a chef in their kitchen, but helping them to understand the needs of their users and how they could come up with new concepts and ideas, how they could rapidly prototype on those. And our testing was with a Michelin star chef in a kitchen making materials. And then the prototype we were doing was still with end users. It was maybe the most delicious and fascinating work we did. It was great. And so it was really fun to warn them, because they wanted to work more like a software company in terms of how they approach problems, not because they were running software. And it was a really, I thought, creative and bold thing that they hired a software company to help them make food differently. It was fascinating.
How did they even come to that thinking? Did they mention that?
Yeah,
did they have an advisor that said you need to go into design hire a firm for design thinking? Or
they had hired a guy who named Rizal, is a wonderful friend of ours. Now that we've gotten to know and work with him several times, but he was brought in as kind of head of innovation, and he was seeing these projects that would spend months and months and months, and it was all innovation theater. So a bunch of slide decks, nothing ever happened. It was all looks really polished, but it's just a deck with nothing ever got executed. Nothing was really changing. And he's like, we need to be able to move nimbly and quickly. We don't want to spend months coming up with decks. We want to actually do something and see if it works. And so he said, we need to start working more like how software companies operated. And I thought it was really interesting to actually come and say, can you work with a big food company and help them think about how they operate? Again, first it's mindset, and then some skill sets we taught them, and then the tool set. The tool sets were not our typical tools. We weren't iterating and developing applications, but it was working with chefs in the same concept of let's create a concept that you can then put in the hands of users. But the first thing we did was do ethnographic research, doing shopping trips with people, going to their kitchens and seeing what they use, what they didn't use, how they think about buying food, how they think about the foods they want to invest in for their families. It was a lot of the same techniques, but it was
same framework.
To work rapidly. Yeah, exactly, same framework. So that was maybe the most weird use case, was prototyping with chefs in a kitchen, and it was great. I think the most innovative one we saw was as we talked about the value of data. As I said, that is becoming more important than the systems that create them. And when you have the ability to have that transparent data across a large, in this case, across an entire organization, the impact that can have. And so one of our clients was telling the story at a conference where they have a very large knowledge graph that they've built around a whole bunch of medicine data and clinical trial information. And they have this really robust data set. Some of it is private. Some of it's actually research that's been open to the public for decades. But the interesting thing about a knowledge graph is you can find relationships between data much differently than in a normal data structure. And so in this case, there was a soccer coach in a small town who had a teenager on their team that was diagnosed with an incredibly rare disease, one that's not commercially viable, which is a disgusting term, but basically it means it's only 1 in 500 million people who have this. No one's going to invest in clinical trials. No one's going to study because it's such a rare concept. And so he called this person who worked in a company and said, you work in pharma. Do you have anything? I don't know what to tell this poor family. Do you got anything I can go on? This is a Hail Mary pass. And that person's like, well, I know my company's been building this large data set. Let me see if there's a way I can use the knowledge graph we've created to know more about what options might be available. And was able to look up this disease and look up which part of the human genome was affected by the disease, surfing the knowledge graph, seeing what other already in market available drugs are known to impact that part of the human genome, and actually found a series of connections by no human can do this, connecting research that's been published over decades and stringing it all together and saying there actually are some commercially approved in-market drugs that have secondary treatment, like they have like alternative treatments, other ways they can affect the human body that actually might be an actual treatment for this incredibly rare disease. And so they had a quick kind of ethics review, and they said, we can't tell the physician what to do, but we can say, read this article, then this article, then this article, like this is the things we think would be interesting research for you to do. That doctor's eyes went wide, called his own ethical review board and said, I think we can treat this patient. I think there's a thing that's out there that's already FDA approved that might be able to affect this poor kid who's been nicknamed Hope. And so being able to structure and getting access to information in a way that allows you to connect the dots across data, you can start finding patterns. And that's why I talk about intelligent products. You can start finding patterns. No human would have been able to tie all those things together over decades and decades of research. But this was able to do something and find an actual possible treatment for a kid who had nothing to go on. And I think that's where we start seeing the value of intelligent products more than just having digital products.
So Mark, on like a granular level, does that look like, what does that look like for your company? Do you go and have to connect all of these sources so that it can be easily searched, or how does that work?
In some cases, I mean, like in this case, they had a large data science team and they were working with a great, like a very large knowledge graph to build that. We were building the application on top of that knowledge graph that would allow people to find those patterns. And so a part of what we're thinking about is how do you structure and organize the data? And then the other part is how do you get users to engage with that data? In this case, it's one of the largest data sets in the world. I think one of the top 10 knowledge graphs. I mean, it's massive. So being able to create an application that allows you to be able to navigate that. And increasingly, that pattern is totally going to change. This is where agentic AI is now starting to change how the industry operates. And I think we are expecting a very large shift in how users engage applications. I think we got it wrong as an industry. If you remember Minority Report when that came out, you had Tom Cruise, like you know, as an expert user, seamlessly navigating between all these different applications and just like flicking with his hands and getting all right down to the answer, like a mad scientist just working through like literally looked like seamless, like the 20 different apps just instantly just going to what he wanted. That's not how the world's going to work. I think that's for a while we thought that's what the digital future looks like. The future in the future actually is going to look a lot more like Her. If you saw the movie with Joaquin Phoenix and he falls in love with his phone with the Scarlett Johansson voice as the AI.
I haven't seen that yet, but I will have to check it out.
So there's a scene where he's like, oh, I'm really stressed out at work. And Scarlett Johansson is on the phone and said, you know what? I'm going to go through your whole inbox. I'm going to archive all the stuff doesn't matter. I'll just bring you back the 10 top most important things. And he's like, thank you. He's not seamlessly navigating all the apps. He's talking to an agent, and the agent's like, let me just do all that work for you. So I think what's going to be interesting is that in the future, humans are not going to use the interfaces we're designing primarily. They'll say, hey, agent, I have a kid on my soccer team that's really struggling right now. We got anything for that? And they'll be like, great, let me go do the research and come back to you with answers. Like, you will have an agent as the primary interface for how it's very possible that's where our industry is going to be going. I think if I had a bet, you're going to see more of a tendency to go towards Her than you are to go towards Minority Report, which is interesting because that's where I think the idea of intelligent products really rises, and putting the power in the hands of the user by interacting with an agent that can do actions on behalf of that user. We're not really there yet, but that's where the industry is going, I think.
Are there any favorite resources you have? It could be books or, sites from this design thinking that people should check out, or maybe just around this thought of design thinking, or some of your favorite resources.
One of the things I thought Google did really well, this was back in 2017, 18, they published a book called Sprint, which wasn't anything really novel, except that they packaged it up really well. And they showcased, if you want to do this kind of work, it doesn't take months. It doesn't take a special research PhD. Here's a way you can do something in 5 days that goes you from like an actual idea to validated, tested prototype by the end of that week. And you get real value in a single week. It is a heads down, very busy week, but you are able to work through the entire process. Those are called design sprints. Design sprints really pave the way for people to start thinking along the lines of how do I get value faster? And I think from design sprints and its popularity in 2017, 18, and 19, you started seeing this broader movement and adoption of design thinking more generally and the double diamond method. And so for people who have been doing design thinking for a while, this is nothing new. They've been doing this for a long time. I think what we started seeing towards that era in software was that pattern, that way of solving problems was getting adopted more by software companies. And then even applying it to large companies like Tyson Foods, they would just operate differently. And so Sprint is a good book to get a primer on how do I do this rapidly and how do I kind of deploy a process that teams can follow in 5 days. But I think the Double Diamond, there's some great books that talk about that, gives a more generic, like here's how you should affect your mindset. It's less of a playbook and more of like how you should be thinking and operating your teams.
Yeah, no, I love that. The two books when you're talking that like just cry out to me is Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time, and then The Goal. Because I feel like what you guys do is you eliminate bottlenecks for these companies, or this is one of the things that you do. And so those two stick out to me when you're talking, for sure.
I think good ways to think about both halves of the equation. You don't want to just build the right thing and have no ability to build the thing right. Like no one wants to end up with a PowerPoint deck at the end of the day and that's it. But you also don't want to only have a company that can build the thing right, but no right way of building the right thing to begin with, because then you could build a whole thing that no one wants. And that's very expensive. You really have to figure out a way to do both.
I want to talk, Mark, about, I know one of the things that's really important to you and the company is culture and some of the things that you do to maintain culture. Because you've done some things, I'm not going to say unorthodox, but just like, I mean, we were talking today, right? Just bringing everyone together can be a pain and you do it. So some of the things that you do that maybe are a pain, but you do it anyways because of the culture. I know you've done things with the chef before and sending food to people. So talk about some of the things that you do from just to maintain culture.
Culture, well, especially for a consulting company where we don't have a platform that we sell, right? We don't have a digital product. Our platform really is our people. So we have to really think about what is the employee experience of TXI. A big thing for us is learning culture and really maintaining a culture of learning. That is a very valuable thing in terms of growing people's careers and helping them to kind of pick up new skills. It allows our clients to benefit from the adoption of those new skills and new capabilities. So this week we're doing something called a co-working week. We fly everyone in together and we get a chance to sit down side by side. After COVID, we went all remote and we take the money we used to spend on rent, now do these kinds of co-working weeks. And one day of that co-working week is just being able to work side by side and do what we call like a no working day, KNOW, no working. We're actually doing like an internal conference to be able to share ideas back and forth. And that internal conference allows us to be able to highlight new ways of working, learn from each other. Like that kind of internal conference is a great way of doing that. And so we try to get all those different people together to talk about how they're operating and how they're collaborating. There are a lot of benefits we have that encourage learning and development. There's lots of conferences we can send people to. There's a lot, even when people are on the beach projects will spin up, help people to learn new skills, training we bring in, and expert companies we get to pair with. No company does everything great, so you always find a way to pair up with new other companies that you can partner with and learn from. So there's a lot of the benefits, a lot of the culture of TXI is anchored around how do we help people learn and grow new skills. And as we think about this, one of our values here is own it, is not just being able to like own your own growth and own your own path, but we talked about ultimately what is the extension of that value is how do you own a piece of the business and that you have a stake in what we're all building together. Because if you really have an ownership stake in the business, it means something more to you than just an employment, just a job. And so a couple of years ago, after we were thinking about this for a long time, we ended up selling the business to the employees to become a fully owned ESOP. And now everyone who's an employee has an ownership stake in the business and has financial upside as the business does well. So when they're growing and they're learning their own skills, not only are they becoming more employable in the market and bringing new skills to their clients, but they're also being able to increase their own value in the market and the value of TXI, which they now have a piece of. So that's a really big value. You can see a picture there of us all doing a kind of learning together. This is where we get the benefit of having that collective ownership, is because we're all incentivized to try to help each other grow and help the company grow as well.
Talk about the ESOP portion, Mark, and maybe some of the things you wish you would have known when you went through the process, because it seems like it's a complicated process.
It is. It's funny. It's the only thing I think Republicans and Democrats agree on. Republicans want to see ESOP succeed because they want people to have more individual reliance without relying on the government when it comes time to retire. And Democrats like it because they want to expand ownership opportunities beyond maybe the very wealthy or the typical C-suite. And so being employee owned is something where, as an ESOP, you no longer pay taxes, but instead you invest back into the employee experiences of your people, and then they have a stake in the financial future of that business, where it's not a governance structure. It's not like they have like voting rights on the board, but they own a piece of the business. And so when they retire or they quit or they're fired or they leave for whatever reason, they get bought out of their ownership stake. And so for people who are here for a year, doesn't have that big of an impact. But if you're here for 5 years or for 10 years, that really adds up. And you start thinking about, having an ownership stake in the business, you start seeing ESOPs become far more resilient businesses because they can reinvest back into their people and to grow their people. And those people see the real value of their tenure in the organization. And so that ESOP allows generally people to be more resilient as organizations, get more agency and more autonomy from their staff, and people start thinking about the long-term trajectory of their careers a bit more.
I mean, Mark, I could see a lot of upsides with it. I'm sure you explored all angles. I'm curious, what did you see as some of the downsides? And obviously, those weren't big enough to overshadow the upside.
I think so. There's something very, like a Pavlov's dog reaction about the way we used to have ownership before was you would literally write a check, you'd buy into the company, and then you would get every quarter we would distribute dividends. You'd actually get cash in hand that quarter. ESOPs don't work that way. ESOPs are you building up net worth in a business that's, as its enterprise value grows, it kind of grows with it. And then when you leave, you get bought out. But there's not that Pavlovian, I get a check in the mail every quarter kind of a thing. You don't get that instant reward. So we have other incentive programs we've created to do things like annual profit distribution with the company hits its goals, like other things that are more short-term incentives. But I think there was something that's a downside, right? Like people that are used to getting a check in the mail every quarter now don't. They have paper money. That's something that pays off when they retire. I think the benefit, though, was that when we asked who wanted to buy in, half the company raised their hand and wrote pretty sizable checks to buy into the company. But the half that did came from, generally speaking, institutional wealth, family wealth, or some place of privilege that they could write a check for $50,000 and buy into the company. Not everyone can do that. And so if you really want to have an equitable company and really want to diversify that ownership opportunity to everybody, you can't just give it to the folks who have access to that money, because they probably can't. Not everyone can do that, especially if they're new parents or they're the first person in their family that went to college and they don't have the background and the money they can borrow from family to do that. So this is an opportunity for everyone to have that upside. But I think that is a far bigger benefit. And so I think getting people to think about the long-term value creation and having a more equitable approach to ownership greatly outweighed that dopamine boost of getting a quarterly distribution.
What type of advisors did you find were important to work through this process?
We had an advisor who just does this. They help companies think through what ESOP means, what it's all about. When we created our board, we wanted someone on the board who'd been involved in running ESOPs before. Primarily could also do employee education. Because I think people have all kinds of questions around how does this work and what is our enterprise value and how does it change? And so every year we've committed to bringing in that board member to do an education around what this means. And in the first year, it was so funny. Everyone's like, "Oh, I'm an owner now. Am I a millionaire?" And we're like, "You're 100 heir. That's what you are." Because it's just the first year,
You've just acquired a lot of. There's a lot of expenses in the business.
But now over time, by the third year, maybe their ownership structure is enough to buy a used car for their kid, and by the fifth year, it's maybe enough to maybe put their kid through college, and by their 10th year, now it has a meaningful impact on their ability to retire. So it does really add up over time, and part of that education is helping people think about, as the enterprise value grows and the debt service is paid down, what does that look like for them? So a fair amount of employee education has to go with it.
Mark, I have two topic questions. I know we have a minute, so I want to make sure that we have enough time so I can keep it to one. Unless you have a few more minutes, I don't want to keep.
I don't, unfortunately.
Okay, no worries.
I'm happy we can get more.
Yeah, no worries.
That,
the last question, then I'll keep it at this, is just parenting, and how have you used some of these business concepts from a parenting perspective?
So I have two girls who I'm regularly trying to encourage and give challenges to, based on some of the things I've learned. And it's funny, I find some of the same facilitation techniques that I use at work in our ideation workshops, or sticky notes on the wall, totally work with kids. In fact, might work better with kids. And so thinking about how, and I can send you maybe an article we can share after, but how to use the same techniques around ideation in a workshop in a professional setting, I might do with a top tier chef at Tyson Foods, and then come home and brainstorm some what ifs with my kids, also using sticky notes. And when we did it well, we made a whole board full of challenges for my kids, and it was so great. That one was you have to build something in Lego taller than you, and one was you've got to read a book to a grandparent. One was got to go outside and find 5 different species of trees with 4 different colored leaves, like just things that not normal challenges they would do. And my dad would come visit, and they'd grab him by the shirt, like, I've got to read a book to a grandparent, get over here. Like, just having this wall of challenges and these sticky notes that could move around Kanban style, like we do in Agile, from in progress to done. It was really fun to see them rise to the challenge, and taking some of the motivational things we do with teams to mark progress and to show a backlog we could do with kids. And they really loved it. And it was great. So yeah, I'll send you an article about creative use of sticky notes for childhood education. I
love it. Mark, thank you. I want to be the first one to thank you. Everyone, check out txidigital.com to learn more, and we'll see everyone next time. Mark, thanks so much.
Thank you.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like $100 grand.